I insist, the famous violinist said coldly, handing the black teenager his $2 million Guarneri violin. Show us this chaconne you claim to have mastered. The auditorium fell silent as Marcus, fighting through his back pain, took the priceless instrument. The humiliation was precisely what Victor Harrington had orchestrated, until those first notes emerged with unexpected authority. But how could a boy from the back row, the one who couldn't even sit properly due to a teacher's beating, play Bach like this? And what would happen when the truth about Marcus's hidden talent and his mother's identity finally came to light? Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published news stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Marcus Johnson winced as he shifted in his seat, the dull ache in his lower back flaring up again. The hard wooden chair in the music room offered no comfort for his condition. He subtly repositioned himself, trying not to draw attention as Ms. Reynolds addressed the class. I have an extraordinary announcement, Ms. Reynolds declared, practically vibrating with excitement. The world-renowned violinist Victor Harrington has agreed to visit our school for a special master class next week. The classroom erupted in gasps and excited chatter. Marcus remained silent, his expression carefully neutral despite the anxiety blooming in his chest. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Ms. Reynolds continued. Mr. Harrington rarely works with students below collegiate level. We've been specially selected based on our orchestra's regional performance. Tyler Westbrook, seated in the front row with his custom violin case prominently displayed beside him, raised his hand. Ms. Reynolds, will Mr. Harrington be selecting students for individual instruction? Yes, Tyler. Mr. Harrington will observe our orchestra rehearsal and select promising students for his master class. Ms. Reynolds beamed at Tyler. I expect our top performers will make quite an impression. Marcus caught his friend Jasmine's worried glance. She knew about his back pain, knew why he couldn't sit properly during long rehearsals. Knew about his secret too. Everyone must be at their absolute best, Ms. Reynolds emphasized. Proper posture, perfect preparation. Mr. Harrington values discipline above all else. As the bell rang, students gathered their instruments with excited chatter. Marcus moved slowly, waiting for the pain to subside before standing. You okay? Jasmine whispered, hanging back. Just the usual, Marcus replied, carefully slinging his backpack over one shoulder instead of two. You should tell Ms. Reynolds about your back before. No, Marcus cut her off. I'm not giving anyone another reason to single me out. As they left the classroom, Tyler brushed past them, violin case swinging carelessly close to Marcus. Better practice until your fingers bleed, Johnson, Tyler smirked. Though I doubt Harrington will even notice you in the back row. Marcus said nothing. Little did Tyler know that while he practiced his assigned pieces at school, Marcus spent hours at home with his mother's old violin, playing pieces far beyond the school orchestra's repertoire, including several of Harrington's most famous recordings. But no one at school knew that. And Marcus preferred to keep it that way. The memory came unbidden as Marcus walked home, each step sending small jolts of pain through his lower back. It had been 4 months ago in Mrs. Bennett's history class. He remembered shifting in his seat, trying to find a comfortable position after a particularly grueling basketball practice the night before. His muscles had been sore, but nothing like what came after. Mr. Johnson. Is my lesson on the Civil War boring you? Mrs. Bennett had snapped, her voice cutting through the classroom. No, ma'am, Marcus had replied. I was just. Stand up when addressing me, she had demanded, pointing to the front of the class. Marcus had complied, rising slowly, his back already aching. Now explain to the class why you can't sit still like everyone else. I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennett. My back is sore from practice. The class had tittered, and Mrs. Bennett's face had hardened. So basketball is more important than your education? Come here. Marcus had approached her desk, anxiety mounting. What happened next still made him flinch at the memory. Mrs. Bennett had grabbed her wooden pointer. Bend over, she commanded. Mrs. Bennet, please, now. The first strike had caught him off guard, not just the pain, but the humiliation. The second and third strikes left welts that would take weeks to heal properly. Later, in the principal's office, Mrs. Bennet had claimed he was being disruptive and disrespectful. When his parents arrived, his father, Dr. James Johnson, had been livid. "You struck my son," Dr. Johnson had demanded. "For adjusting his posture." "We have traditional discipline methods here," Principal Whitmore had explained dismissively. "Mrs. Bennet has taught for 20 years. "I don't care if she's taught for 50, his mother, Eliza Johnson, had responded. "No one lays hands on our child." That night, as his mother applied ointment to the angry welts, she'd whispered, "Music will heal what they try to break, Marcus. Never forget that." The school had reluctantly placed Mrs. Bennet on a 1-week administrative leave, with pay. But the damage was done. The doctor confirmed that one particularly hard blow had caused minor damage to the muscles supporting his spine. It would heal eventually, but for now, sitting for long periods remained painful. His father had wanted to press charges, but Marcus had begged him not to. "It'll just make things worse, Dad. They already look at me differently." The one blessing was that Mrs. Bennet now avoided looking at him entirely. But the other teachers had subtly changed too, treating him more carefully, as if his family's response had been an overreaction. Only at home, playing his mother's violin, did Marcus find true relief. In those moments, the pain receded as music flowed through him like a healing current. As Marcus approached his house now, he made a decision. Victor Harrington's visit would mean nothing to him. He would stay in the back, play adequately but not remarkably, and avoid drawing any attention. The last thing he needed was another teacher singling him out. The day of Victor Harrington's arrival dawned bright and clear. The school had been transformed overnight. Fresh flowers adorned the entrance, a red carpet runner stretched from the curb to the front doors, and a large banner proclaimed, "Westlake Academy welcomes Maestro Victor Harrington." Principal Whitmore stood at attention in a freshly pressed suit, flanked by Ms. Reynolds and several board members. The chamber orchestra, including Tyler with his gleaming violin, was arranged on the steps for a welcome performance. Marcus and the regular orchestra students watched from the sidelines, instructed to maintain respectful silence during the proceedings. "This is ridiculous," Jasmine whispered beside Marcus. "They're treating him like royalty." "Shoo," Marcus cautioned, noting Ms. Reynolds' sharp glance in their direction. A sleek black town car pulled up precisely at 9 a.m. The chamber orchestra began playing Vivaldi's Spring as the driver hurried around to open the rear door. Victor Harrington emerged slowly, deliberately, a tall man with silver-streaked black hair and a posture that screamed authority. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most teachers' monthly salaries. His expression remained neutral as he surveyed the display before him, neither impressed nor displeased. "Maestro Harrington. What an honor to welcome you to Westlake Academy," Principal Whitmore gushed, extending his hand. Harrington shook it briefly. "The honor is mine, Principal." "Whitmore, was it?" Principal Whitmore's smile faltered slightly at the implication that Harrington hadn't bothered to remember his name despite their multiple planning calls. "Your reputation precedes you," Harrington continued, his gaze sweeping past the principal to the chamber orchestra, who were still valiantly playing despite his lack of acknowledgement. With a slight wave of his hand, he silenced them mid-phrase. "Technically proficient," he commented, though lacking emotional depth. "We'll address that." Tyler's face fell visibly, though he quickly recovered, standing taller as Harrington's eyes passed over him. Harrington turned to Ms. Reynolds. "You must be the music director. Your students play like they're afraid of their instruments." Ms. Reynolds' smile remained fixed as she replied, "They're simply nervous in your presence, Maestro. They've been practicing diligently." "Nerves are for amateurs," Harrington dismissed. "True musicians transcend anxiety." He gestured toward the building. "Shall we proceed? I'd prefer to hear the full orchestra before lunch." As the entourage moved inside, Marcus caught a snippet of Harrington's continuing critique. Classical music requires discipline, refinement. Not everyone possesses the cultural background to truly appreciate its complexities. Jasmine rolled her eyes. Did he just? Yeah, Marcus nodded grimly. He did. The regular orchestra students filed in behind the procession, heading for the auditorium. As they walked, Ms. Reynolds fell back to address them. Remember, perfect posture, perfect attention. Maestro Harrington believes in traditional performance etiquette. Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. Perfect posture was exactly what he couldn't maintain for the 2-hour rehearsal ahead. In the auditorium, Harrington installed himself in a velvet-upholstered chair that had been specially brought in for his visit. He removed a small leather notebook and gold pen from his breast pocket while the students arranged themselves on stage. I understand you have some scholarship prospects in this group. Harrington asked, not looking up as he made notes. Yes, primarily Tyler Westbrook, our concertmaster, Ms. Reynolds replied eagerly. His family has donated our new music wing, but his talent stands on its own merit. I'll be the judge of that, Harrington responded coolly. Finally, he looked up at the assembled students, his gaze sharp and evaluating. Begin with Mozart's Symphony No. 40. First movement. As Marcus settled into his chair in the back row of second violins, he felt Harrington's eyes flicker over him briefly before moving on. He shifted uncomfortably, already feeling the familiar pain beginning to build. 2 hours, he told himself. Just get through 2 hours without drawing attention. Little did he know that Victor Harrington had already noted the boy who couldn't sit properly with his violin, and had already found him lacking. The rehearsal progressed with excruciating slowness. 30 minutes in, Marcus felt the familiar burning sensation spreading across his lower back. He subtly adjusted his position, lifting slightly off the chair to relieve the pressure. From his throne-like seat, Victor Harrington observed every detail of the orchestra. His eyes narrowed at each imperfection, a slightly off-tempo entrance from the cellos, an imprecise trill from the flutes. But his gaze repeatedly returned to the second violin section, where Marcus continued his subtle movements. Stop, Harrington commanded suddenly. The orchestra fell silent mid-phrase. You there, second row of violins. Third seat. Marcus froze, realizing Harrington was addressing him. Yes, you. What is your name? Marcus Johnson, sir. Mr. Johnson, is my presence so boring that you must fidget constantly? Heat rose to Marcus's face. No, sir. Then explain why you can't maintain proper posture like your colleagues. Marcus hesitated. The last time he'd explained his back pain to a teacher, it had ended with a beating that worsened his condition. I have back pain, sir. Harrington's eyebrow arched skeptically. Back pain? At your age? His tone dripped with disbelief. Music requires discipline, Mr. Johnson. If you cannot sit properly, perhaps you shouldn't be playing at all. Ms. Reynolds stepped forward quickly. Marcus is actually quite dedicated, Maestro Harrington. He's just. I didn't ask for your defense, Ms. Reynolds, Harrington cut her off sharply. He turned back to Marcus. The violin is not merely played with the hands, but with the entire body. Your posture suggests a fundamental lack of understanding, or perhaps commitment. Tyler Westbrook smirked from his concertmaster position, clearly enjoying Marcus's humiliation. We'll continue, Harrington announced, dismissing Marcus with a wave. From measure 57. As the orchestra resumed playing, Marcus struggled to focus on the music while managing his pain. Each time he shifted position, he felt Harrington's disapproving glare. After an hour and 45 minutes of rehearsal, and multiple stops for Harrington's critiques, Ms. Reynolds announced, we'll conclude with Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, featuring our concertmaster, Tyler Westbrook. Tyler rose confidently, positioning himself as soloist while the orchestra adjusted their music. He launched into the concerto with technical precision, though his playing lacked the emotional depth the piece demanded. Nevertheless, Harrington nodded approvingly throughout the performance. Well done, Mr. Westbrook, Harrington commented when Tyler finished. A few interpretive adjustments would elevate your performance, but your technique is commendable." Tyler beamed at the praise. "Now," Harrington stood, addressing the entire orchestra, "I will select 6 students for tomorrow's master class." He consulted his leather notebook. Tyler Westbrook, naturally. Emma Chen from the first violins. Jacob Miller, cello. As Harrington continued naming students, Marcus felt relief washing over him. Being overlooked was exactly what he'd hoped for. "And finally," Harrington concluded, "I'd like to work with." He paused dramatically, scanning the orchestra. His gaze settled on Marcus. "Mr. Johnson." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the orchestra. Marcus sat stunned, unable to process what he'd just heard. "But sir," Ms. Reynolds interjected, clearly confused, "Marcus isn't part of our advanced program. Perhaps you prefer Lisa from the violas? She's preparing for conservatory auditions." "I'm quite capable of making my own selections, Ms. Reynolds," Harrington replied coldly. "I'm curious to see if Mr. Johnson's playing is as poor as his posture. It will make for an instructive contrast to the others." The implication was clear: Marcus would serve as the negative example. The student who didn't belong. "The master class begins at 10 a.m. tomorrow," Harrington announced. "Bring your instruments and be prepared to perform your most polished piece." His eyes fixed on Marcus again. "No excuses about back pain. Music transcends physical discomfort." As the students were dismissed, Jasmine squeezed Marcus's shoulder supportively. "You okay?" Marcus nodded numbly. "I guess I don't have a choice." "You could tell him about what happened with Mrs. Bennet," Jasmine suggested. "That would just give him more ammunition," Marcus replied quietly. "Besides, you heard him, no excuses." As they packed up their instruments, Tyler approached, his expression smug. "Looking forward to your performance tomorrow, Johnson. Harrington eats amateurs for breakfast." Marcus said nothing, carefully placing his school-issued violin in its case. Tonight, he would practice with his mother's violin, the one no one at school had ever heard him play. Not that it would matter. Harrington had already decided what he thought of Marcus. Or so he believed. That evening, Marcus stood in his bedroom, his mother's violin in hand. The instrument was a genuine Johann Kohler from the late 1800s, not the most prestigious maker, but with a warm, resonant tone that surpassed any student model. It had been Eliza Johnson's most treasured possession before her performing career ended. "Honey." His mother's voice came from the doorway. "You've been practicing for 3 hours straight." Marcus lowered the violin. "I have to be ready, Mom." Eliza entered the room, her eyes filled with concern. "Marcus, your father told me about this Harrington character. You don't have to prove anything to someone like that." "Yes, I do," Marcus replied firmly. "Not for him. For me." His mother studied him for a long moment. "Are you taking your violin tomorrow? Your real one?" Marcus hesitated. He'd been debating this question all evening. The school-issued violin was adequate but uninspiring. His mother's violin, his violin now, had a soul that responded to his touch. "I think I should," he finally answered. But you're worried about standing out," Eliza finished for him. She sat on the edge of his bed. "Marcus, sometimes being invisible doesn't protect you. It just lets others define who you are." Later that night, Dr. James Johnson stopped by Marcus's room. "Your mother told me about tomorrow." Marcus nodded, carefully placing his violin in its case. "Son, I want you to know something," Dr. Johnson said quietly. "There will always be people who look at you and see only what they expect to see. Your job isn't to change their minds. Your job is to be so undeniably excellent that they question their own assumptions." "What if that makes things worse?" Marcus asked. His father's expression hardened slightly. "Then we deal with it. Together. Like we did with Mrs. Bennet." The next morning, Marcus arrived at school with his mother's violin case. He'd decided to bring both instruments, the school violin as a backup in case he lost his nerve. The auditorium was arranged for the master class, with chairs set in a semicircle on stage and rows of seats filled with students and teachers in the audience. Marcus took his place among the selected students, noting he was positioned at the far end, the least prestigious spot. Victor Harrington strode onto the stage precisely at 10 a.m., wearing a different but equally expensive suit. He surveyed the selected students with calculated intensity. "Music is the highest form of human expression," he began. "It requires intelligence, sensitivity, and cultural understanding that few possess innately. Those qualities must be cultivated through rigorous discipline and proper instruction." His gaze flickered briefly to Marcus before continuing. "We'll begin with Mr. Westbrook." Tyler performed a Paganini caprice with technical accuracy, receiving measured praise from Harrington, who spent 20 minutes refining Tyler's bowing technique. Each student performed in turn, receiving increasingly brief attention from Harrington. By the time the fifth student finished, it was nearly noon. And finally, Harrington announced, checking his watch, "We have Mr. Johnson." Marcus rose slowly, conscious of his back pain after sitting for 2 hours. "I notice you're still struggling with basic posture," Harrington observed coldly. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, refusing to explain further. "And which violin will you be using? I see you've brought 2 cases." Marcus hesitated, then made his decision. "My own, sir." As Marcus removed his mother's violin from its case, Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly at the unexpected quality of the instrument. "An interesting choice for a student at your level," Harrington remarked. "Let's hear what you can do with it." Victor Harrington's eyes narrowed as he studied the violin in Marcus's hands. "That appears to be a 19th-century German instrument. Kohler, perhaps?" The question held a trap, a test to see if Marcus knew what he was holding. "Yes, sir. Johann Kohler, circa 1890, Marcus replied quietly. A flicker of surprise crossed Harrington's face before his expression hardened again. "I'm curious how a student in your circumstances came to possess such an instrument." The implication hung heavy in the air. The audience shifted uncomfortably. "It was my mother's," Marcus answered simply. "I see." Harrington's tone suggested he didn't believe Marcus. "Well, even the finest instrument cannot compensate for inadequate technique. What will you be playing for us today?" "Bach's Chaconne from Partita No. 2 in D minor." A ripple of whispers spread through the audience. Even Tyler looked shocked. The Chaconne was one of the most challenging solo violin pieces ever written, far beyond the typical high school repertoire. Harrington didn't bother to hide his skepticism. "That's quite ambitious. Perhaps something more appropriate to your skill level would be prudent." "This is what I've prepared, sir." Harrington's lips curled into a cold smile. "Very well. Stand here." He pointed to the center of the stage. "Proper performance posture is essential. No slouching or fidgeting." Marcus moved to the indicated spot, wincing slightly as pain shot through his lower back. "Actually," Harrington said suddenly, "I'd like you to use my violin instead." He gestured to his assistant, who brought forward a case and opened it to reveal a gleaming Guarneri. "Since you appreciate fine instruments, you should experience a truly exceptional one." The audience gasped. Harrington's Guarneri was rumored to be worth over $2 million. "Oh, but sir," Ms. Reynolds protested from the side of the stage. "I insist," Harrington cut her off, taking Marcus's Kohler and handing him the Guarneri. "A proper instrument might inspire proper posture." Marcus carefully took the priceless violin, immediately noting its different weight and balance. He would need to adjust quickly. "Now, Mr. Johnson," Harrington continued, seating himself prominently at the edge of the stage, "you'll perform standing completely straight, without leaning or shifting position. Show us this Chaconne you claim to have mastered." The command was deliberately cruel, forcing Marcus to endure his back pain throughout the 15-minute piece. Several audience members looked uncomfortably at each other, recognizing the humiliation being orchestrated. Marcus placed the Guarneri under his chin, trying to find a comfortable position. His back screamed in protest as he straightened fully. "Begin," Harrington commanded, a satisfied gleam in his eye. Marcus raised the bow, his hand trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from the effort of maintaining the rigid posture Harrington demanded. He took a deep breath and began the opening chords of the chaconne. The first notes emerged hesitantly as he struggled to adapt to the unfamiliar instrument while managing his pain. Harrington's expression grew increasingly smug. "Stop," Harrington interrupted after just a few measures. "This is precisely what I expected. You're merely approximating the notes without understanding the architectural complexity of Bach's masterpiece." Marcus lowered the violin, his face burning with humiliation. "This piece," Harrington continued, addressing the audience rather than Marcus, "represents the pinnacle of solo violin literature. It requires not only technical prowess but cultural lineage, an understanding of Baroque tradition that comes from proper training and background." The implications were unmistakable. Marcus lacked this background, a thinly veiled reference to his race. "Perhaps," Harrington suggested with false generosity, "you should try something simpler. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, perhaps." Laughter rippled through parts of the audience, including from Tyler and his friends. Marcus stood frozen, the priceless violin still in his hands, pain radiating through his back. "No." Harrington pressed. "Then please continue your chaconne, if you insist. Show us what you can do with an instrument you clearly don't deserve to hold." In that moment, something shifted in Marcus. The pain in his back became secondary to the fire igniting in his chest. He thought of his mother's words, "Music will heal what they try to break." Marcus raised the Guarneri again. This time, instead of trying to impress Harrington or prove anything to the audience, he closed his eyes and simply let himself play, the way he did at home when no one was listening, when the music was just for him. He began the chaconne again, from the beginning. But this time, something different emerged. The first chord resonated through the auditorium with unexpected authority. Marcus's fingers moved across the strings with practiced precision, his bow drawing out the rich, resonant tones of Harrington's Guarneri. The audience fell utterly silent. Marcus played with his eyes closed, lost in the music, his body finding its own posture, one that accommodated his pain while allowing the freedom needed for expression. The opening theme unfolded with dignified restraint, building layer upon layer of harmonic complexity. Harrington's smug expression faltered, then froze entirely. This was not the fumbling attempt he had expected. This was not a student mimicking without understanding. This was Bach rendered with profound technical skill and, more disturbingly to Harrington, deep emotional intelligence. In his mind, Marcus was no longer on stage. He was in his bedroom, playing for himself and his mother, who had taught him this very piece over countless evening sessions. "Feel the architecture," she had instructed. "Bach builds a cathedral with these variations. Each one must stand on its own while supporting the whole." As Marcus moved into the first variation, his technique became more apparent. His left hand navigated the fingerboard with uncanny precision, executing perfect intonation even in the most challenging passages. His right arm controlled the bow with subtle mastery, creating dynamic contrasts that breathed life into Bach's mathematical precision. Jasmine, watching from the audience, couldn't suppress a smile as she saw the confusion spreading across the faces of Tyler and his friends. Ms. Reynolds sat forward in her chair, her expression a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The music rose and fell, following Bach's architectural blueprint but infused with Marcus's distinct voice. In the minor key variations, he channeled the pain and frustration of months of silent endurance. In the major sections, the violin sang with unexpected sweetness, revealing glimpses of joy that transcended circumstance. A memory flashed through Marcus's mind as he played, his mother standing behind him, adjusting his elbow position, saying, "Let the phrase breathe here. Music is a conversation, not a monologue." Now, with each phrase, Marcus was speaking truths he'd never voiced aloud, about the pain of being overlooked, about the struggle to belong, about finding solace in beauty when surrounded by ugliness. The famous D major variation arrived, bringing with it a ray of sunlight after the storm of minor harmonies. Marcus's fingers danced across the strings with seemingly impossible agility, the notes cascading in perfect succession. In the audience, Principal Whitmore leaned toward Ms. Reynolds. "Did you know he could play like this?" he whispered urgently. Ms. Reynolds shook her head slightly, her eyes never leaving Marcus. Victor Harrington remained motionless, his expression unreadable. But those closest to him noticed his knuckles whitening as he gripped the armrests of his chair. As Marcus approached the final variations, returning to the profound solemnity of D minor, the pain in his back had receded to a distant awareness. The music had become his entire reality, each note a stepping stone across the river of Bach's genius. The final chords rang out with resolute dignity, neither rushed nor lingered upon, but given exactly the weight they required. The last note hung in the air like a question mark, Bach's eternal query about mortality and transcendence. Then, silence. For 3 full seconds, no one in the auditorium moved or breathed. It was as if time itself had been suspended by the final note. Then, from the back of the hall, someone began to applaud. The sound spread like wildfire, growing into thunderous appreciation that washed over Marcus as he opened his eyes, suddenly returning to the reality of where he was and what he had done. The standing ovation engulfed him. Students, teachers, parents, even those who had laughed at Harrington's mocking suggestion, were on their feet, some with tears in their eyes. Only 3 people remained seated: Tyler, whose face had drained of all color, Principal Whitmore, who looked as though he'd seen a ghost, and Victor Harrington, whose expression had transformed from smugness to something far more complex and troubled. Marcus lowered the guarneri, his hands trembling now not from pain but from the emotional aftermath of the performance. He had revealed himself completely, had shown a part of his soul he had kept hidden for years. There was no going back. The applause continued unabated, washing over Marcus in waves. Students who had never spoken to him were on their feet, cheering. Teachers exchanged astonished glances, their educational assumptions visibly crumbling. In the 3rd row, Jasmine wiped tears from her eyes while grinning fiercely. This was the Marcus she knew existed, the one who played with his soul when no one was watching. Victor Harrington remained seated, his face a carefully composed mask, though a muscle twitched noticeably in his jaw. He had underestimated this student in every possible way, and now he had to navigate the consequences of his public misjudgment. As the applause finally began to subside, Marcus carefully lowered the guarneri, suddenly conscious again of the priceless instrument in his hands. The movement sent a sharp reminder of pain through his back, breaking the spell that had temporarily insulated him from his physical discomfort. Harrington rose slowly, his expression unreadable as he approached Marcus. For a moment, student and maestro stood facing each other in tense silence. An unexpected interpretation, Harrington finally said, his voice carefully controlled. He held out his hand for the guarneri. "You've clearly spent time with the piece." It wasn't praise, not exactly, but it was the closest thing to acknowledgement Harrington seemed capable of offering. Marcus returned the violin with a respectful nod. "Thank you for the opportunity to play your instrument, sir." Another wave of applause threatened to erupt at this exchange, but Harrington raised his hand to silence it. "Before we conclude, I'd like Mr. Johnson to explain his approach to the Sciacona." He emphasized the Italian pronunciation, reasserting his authority through academic precision. "Specifically, how did you conceptualize the architectural structure?" The question was a test, a final attempt to prove that Marcus's performance had been mere mimicry rather than understanding. Marcus took a moment before answering, organizing his thoughts despite the lingering pain and emotional aftermath of his performance. "I see the Chaconne as a journey through grief," he began quietly. Bach wrote it after returning from a trip to discover his wife had died. The 4-bar bass line represents his foundation, the ground beneath his feet when everything else was shifting. Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly at this historical context that many students wouldn't know. The variations, Marcus continued, follow his emotional path. The minor sections express his despair, the major section represents memory or hope breaking through. The final return to minor suggests acceptance without forgetting. A murmur ran through the audience. This wasn't a technical description but a deeply personal interpretation, one that explained the emotional impact of Marcus's playing. Ms. Reynolds stepped forward then, seeing an opportunity to wrap up the master class on a positive note. "Thank you, Marcus. And thank you, Maestro Harrington, for this enlightening session." But Harrington wasn't finished. "One more question, Mr. Johnson. Where did you learn to play the Bach chaconne at this level? Certainly not in a public school orchestra program." The implication was clear. Harrington still couldn't reconcile Marcus's ability with his preconceptions. "My mother taught me," Marcus replied simply. "Your mother?" Harrington repeated skeptically. "And who taught her?" Before Marcus could answer, a new voice spoke from the auditorium entrance. "Sergei Barsakov at the Moscow Conservatory, followed by Ivan Galamian at Curtis. The same teachers you studied with, Mr. Harrington, though I was there several years before you." All heads turned to see Eliza Johnson standing in the doorway, poised and elegant in her hospital administrator's suit. Beside her stood Dr. James Johnson, his expression a mixture of pride and protective vigilance. A shocked whisper rippled through the audience, "That's Marcus's mom." Harrington stared at Eliza, recognition dawning on his face. "Eliza Washington." "Johnson now," she corrected, walking down the center aisle. "It's been a long time, Victor." Ms. Reynolds looked between them in confusion. "You know each other?" Eliza Washington was considered one of the most promising violinists of her generation, Harrington explained, his voice strained. "She disappeared from the concert stage nearly 20 years ago." "I didn't disappear," Eliza replied calmly, reaching the stage and extending her hand to help Marcus down the steps. "I chose a different path." The implications of this exchange reverberated through the auditorium. Marcus hadn't learned from just any mother, he'd learned from a former prodigy, someone from within the very classical tradition Harrington had implied was foreign to him. "Why didn't you tell us who you were, Mrs. Johnson?" Principal Whitmore asked, appearing suddenly at Eliza's side, his manner significantly more deferential than it had been during their previous interactions. "You never asked," she replied simply. "And it wasn't relevant to my son's education, or to how he should be treated." She turned back to Harrington. "Victor, I understand you'll be performing with the symphony tomorrow night. Perhaps you'd join us for dinner this evening? For old time's sake." The invitation was both an olive branch and a challenge. Harrington hesitated, visibly calculating the social and professional implications. "I would be honored," he finally replied, his tone suggesting that honor had very little to do with his acceptance. As Marcus walked down the aisle with his parents, students and teachers parted to let them pass. He caught glimpses of their expressions, shock, reassessment, and in some cases, genuine shame. Tyler stood near the exit, his face a study in conflicting emotions. As Marcus approached, Tyler took a small step forward, as if to speak, then apparently thought better of it and stepped back. Outside in the hallway, away from the curious eyes of the crowd, Marcus finally allowed himself to lean against the wall, the pain in his back making itself fully known again. "You were magnificent," his mother whispered, embracing him gently. "Are you okay?" his father asked, medical concern evident in his expression. Marcus nodded, then asked the question foremost in his mind, "Did you know he would be here, Mom? Is that why you suggested I bring your violin?" Eliza shook her head. "No. But I knew someday you'd need to stop hiding who you are." She touched his cheek gently. "Some talents are too important to keep to yourself, no matter how much easier it seems." Dr. Johnson placed a supportive hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Now, let's get you home to rest before this dinner. Something tells me tomorrow is going to be an interesting day at school." That, Marcus thought as they walked toward the exit, was putting it mildly. The Johnson family home was a comfortable colonial in a middle-class neighborhood, modest compared to the mansions where Harrington typically dined, but impeccably maintained and tastefully furnished. Victor Harrington arrived precisely at 7 p.m., chauffeur-driven and carrying an expensive bottle of wine. "Eliza," he greeted as she opened the door. "You look well." His eyes surveyed the entrance hall, taking in the family photos, the artwork, and the unmistakable absence of poverty he had implicitly assumed. "Thank you, Victor. Please come in." Eliza's tone was polite but reserved. "James is finishing dinner, and Marcus is setting the table." "Your husband cooks?" Harrington asked, unable to mask his surprise. "James enjoys it," Eliza replied simply. "He says it's similar to surgery, precise measurements and timing." She led him to the living room, where a baby grand piano occupied one corner and a violin case rested on a side table. Harrington gravitated toward the instrument immediately. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the case. "Of course." Harrington opened it carefully, revealing Marcus's Kohler. He lifted it with practiced hands, examining it closely. "This isn't the instrument I expected Marcus to possess," he admitted. "It's well maintained, quite valuable." "It was my performance violin," Eliza explained. "I gave it to Marcus when he turned 12. "And when did you begin teaching him?" "He was 4 when he first showed interest. We started formally at 6. Harrington placed the violin back in its case with newfound respect. "He plays remarkably well." "Yes," Eliza agreed simply. "He does." Dr. James Johnson appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. "Dinner's ready. Mr. Harrington, welcome to our home." Throughout the meal, a perfectly executed roast with seasonal vegetables, the conversation remained carefully civilized. Harrington inquired about Eliza's career change. "I found healthcare administration allowed me to help more people, and Dr. Johnson's practice, cardiothoracic surgery, primarily at Mercy Hospital." It wasn't until dessert that Harrington finally addressed Marcus directly. "Your performance today was unexpected." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, sir. I'm curious why you've hidden your abilities at school. Your orchestra teacher clearly had no idea of your skill level." Before Marcus could answer, Dr. Johnson interjected. "Marcus has had some difficult experiences at school that made him cautious about drawing attention to himself." "Difficult experiences?" Harrington repeated, looking between them. Eliza and James exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Eliza nodded slightly. "Last semester," Dr. Johnson explained, his voice controlled but edged with lingering anger, "Marcus was physically disciplined by a teacher for adjusting his posture during class." "Disciplined?" Harrington echoed. "She struck him repeatedly across the back with a wooden pointer," Dr. Johnson clarified. "Hard enough to cause tissue damage that still causes him pain when sitting for extended periods." Harrington's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "That's why you couldn't maintain proper posture during rehearsal." Marcus nodded silently. "But surely the school," Harrington began. "The school placed the teacher on paid leave for 1 week," Eliza finished for him. "Principal Whitmore assured us it was handled appropriately." "I see." Harrington set down his fork carefully. "And your legal recourse?" "Marcus asked us not to pursue it," Dr. Johnson replied. He was concerned it would only make his situation at school more difficult. A heavy silence fell over the table. Harrington studied Marcus with new eyes, seeing not just a talented student but a young man who had made a calculated decision to become invisible for his own protection. "That explains your posture," Harrington finally said. "But not why you've hidden your violin skills. Surely your music teacher would have supported your talent." Marcus hesitated before answering. "Ms. Reynolds focuses on students she believes have potential for prestigious conservatories. When I first arrived, she evaluated all new students. After playing a few scales, she assigned me to the second violins without further questions." "What Marcus isn't saying," Eliza added quietly, "is that every student Ms. Reynolds has championed for special opportunities has come from a certain demographic background." "I see," Harrington said again, though his tone suggested he was only beginning to see the fuller picture. Later, as they moved to the living room for coffee, Harrington found himself alone with Marcus while Eliza and James prepared a tray in the kitchen. "Your mother was extraordinary," Harrington said abruptly. "When she was your age, critics were already calling her the next Mutter. I know, Marcus replied. She has the reviews in a box in her closet. Do you know why she stopped performing? Marcus nodded. She was tired of being the exception. The token who proved the rule. Harrington winced slightly at the accuracy of this assessment. And you? What are your plans? I want to study music therapy, Marcus answered. Using music to help people heal. Before Harrington could respond, Eliza and James returned with coffee. The conversation shifted to safer topics, upcoming symphony performances, developments in classical recording technologies. As the evening wound down, Harrington rose to leave. At the door, he turned to Marcus with uncharacteristic hesitation. Mr. Johnson, Marcus. I owe you an apology for my behavior today. I made assumptions that were unfounded. Marcus nodded acknowledgement but said nothing. I would be honored if you would attend my performance tomorrow night. As my guest. Harrington reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. 3 tickets, front row center. Eliza accepted the envelope with a polite smile. Thank you, Victor. We'll discuss it as a family. After Harrington had departed in his waiting town car, the Johnson family stood together in the hallway. Well, Dr. Johnson said dryly, that was certainly an educational evening for our esteemed maestro. Do you think he really understands? Marcus asked. Eliza considered this question carefully before answering. I think he's beginning to. Whether that understanding leads to change is another question entirely. Should we go tomorrow? Marcus looked at the tickets in his mother's hand. That, his father replied, is entirely up to you, son. But whatever you decide, remember, you never have to make yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable. Not anymore. Marcus took the tickets, turning them over in his hands thoughtfully. Tomorrow would indeed be an interesting day. The next morning, Marcus arrived at school to find the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Students who had never acknowledged him now smiled or nodded as he passed. Teachers gave him speculative glances, as if seeing him for the first time. You're a celebrity, Jasmine commented as they walked to first period. Everyone's talking about your performance, and about your mom being some famous violinist. She wasn't exactly famous, Marcus corrected. She was on her way, but, Marcus Johnson. A voice interrupted. They turned to see Principal Whitmore's secretary. The principal would like to see you in his office. Now. Exchanging concerned glances with Jasmine, Marcus followed the secretary to the administration wing. To his surprise, Ms. Reynolds was already seated in Principal Whitmore's office, along with his parents and, most unexpectedly, Mrs. Bennet. Marcus, please sit down, Principal Whitmore gestured to an empty chair beside his parents. His tone was solicitous, markedly different from his usual brusque manner with students. What's this about? Marcus asked, remaining standing. Your parents have raised some concerns that, in light of yesterday's events, warrant immediate attention, Principal Whitmore explained smoothly. Specifically regarding your previous interaction with Mrs. Bennet. Mrs. Bennet sat rigidly, her expression a mixture of defiance and apprehension. She hadn't made eye contact with Marcus since he entered. You mean when she beat me with a pointer hard enough to cause lasting damage? Marcus clarified, his voice steady. The room tensed at his directness. Now, I wouldn't characterize it that way, Principal Whitmore began. I would, Dr. Johnson interrupted. As would the medical report we filed at the time, the one your office conveniently misplaced. He removed a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the desk. Here's another copy, along with documentation from Marcus's physical therapist about the ongoing effects. Principal Whitmore reluctantly opened the folder, scanning its contents with growing discomfort. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish here? He asked finally. Eliza Johnson leaned forward. Accountability. Recognition of harm done. And structural changes to ensure no other student experiences what Marcus did. Mrs. Bennet has been with this school for 20 years, Principal Whitmore protested. Her record is exemplary. Is it? Dr. Johnson challenged. Or have other incidents been similarly dismissed? Mrs. Bennet shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. Ms. Reynolds, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke. There have been other complaints. Primarily from minority students. All eyes turned to her in surprise. Ms. Reynolds, Principal Whitmore warned. No, she said firmly. I've been complicit in this by staying silent. When students complained about Mrs. Bennet's discipline methods, I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere with another teacher's classroom management. She turned to Marcus. I also owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your musical background and abilities without giving you a fair evaluation. I steered opportunities towards students I thought would reflect well on our program, meaning students from certain families, with certain advantages. Principal Whitmore cleared his throat loudly. This conversation has veered significantly off topic. The issue at hand is a single disciplinary incident that was addressed according to school policy. That's precisely the problem, Eliza replied. Your policy allowed a teacher to physically abuse my son with minimal consequences. And based on what we're hearing, Marcus wasn't the first victim. Mrs. Bennet finally broke her silence. I have never abused any student. I maintain appropriate discipline in my classroom, which is increasingly difficult in today's permissive environment. Marcus stepped forward. You hit me hard enough to damage muscle tissue because I couldn't sit comfortably in your class. You called it disrespect. What would you call it? Necessary correction, Mrs. Bennet retorted. Students need to learn respect for authority. By being beaten? Dr. Johnson demanded. Is that what you did to other students who didn't conform to your expectations? The room fell silent as Mrs. Bennet's expression confirmed what no one had explicitly stated. Marcus wasn't an isolated incident but part of a pattern. Principal Whitmore attempted to regain control. Let's not make sweeping accusations based on a single incident. It's not a single incident, a new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see Victor Harrington standing in the doorway, his presence commanding immediate attention. I've spent the morning making inquiries. Mrs. Bennet has a reputation among certain students, particularly those of color, for excessive discipline. He entered the office fully, closing the door behind him. When I mentioned the situation to the board president over breakfast, he was deeply concerned. Particularly given the potential legal and public relations implications. Principal Whitmore paled visibly. The board president? Mr. Westbrook? Indeed. He was quite disturbed to learn that corporal punishment resulting in medical documentation was being classified as routine discipline. Victor, Principal Whitmore began desperately, surely you understand the complexities of maintaining standards in today's educational environment. What I understand, Harrington interrupted coldly, is that a student with extraordinary musical talent was physically harmed in your school, creating a lingering condition that affected his ability to play, and your response was to issue the equivalent of a long weekend to the responsible party. He turned to Marcus's parents. Dr. and Mrs. Johnson, I've taken the liberty of arranging a meeting with the full board this afternoon. I believe they should hear directly from you about your experience with Westlake Academy's disciplinary practices. Ms. Reynolds stood. I'd like to attend that meeting as well. There are other issues of systematic bias in our music program that need addressing. Principal Whitmore looked stricken. Now, wait just a minute. No, Dr. Johnson cut him off. We've waited long enough. 4 months, to be exact. 4 months of watching our son in pain. 4 months of him hiding his talents because he feared drawing attention to himself. That ends today. He turned to Mrs. Bennet. You should prepare yourself for a formal review of your teaching practices. Every student you've disciplined over the years will have the opportunity to share their experiences. Mrs. Bennet's face drained of color. You can't do that. It's my word against theirs. Actually, Eliza replied calmly, it's your word against medical evidence, multiple testimonies, and the school's own documentation, incomplete as it may be. Principal Whitmore attempted one last defense. This approach seems unnecessarily confrontational. Perhaps we could discuss this privately, without involving the board or other students. That, Harrington stated firmly, is precisely how institutions perpetuate harm, by handling matters privately. I've seen similar patterns in the music world, where powerful figures are protected while victims are silenced. It ends the same way, badly, and very publicly. He checked his watch. The board meets at 3. I suggest you all prepare accordingly. As they left the office, Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, certainly, but also a strange sense of melancholy. This confrontation had been necessary, but it hadn't given him pleasure to watch the adults in authority squirm under scrutiny. In the hallway, he found himself walking beside Harrington. "Thank you," he said simply. Harrington paused, studying Marcus with new respect. "Don't thank me. I should have asked about your posture issue yesterday instead of assuming. Why did you change your mind? About me?" Harrington considered the question carefully. "Last night, after dinner, I realized I'd been guilty of something I despise in others, judging based on preconceptions rather than evidence. It's professionally embarrassing." For the first time, Marcus saw something genuinely human in Harrington's expression, regret, possibly even shame. "Will you still attend tonight's performance?" Harrington asked. Marcus thought about it for a moment. "Yes. But not because you invited us." "Oh. Because I love music," Marcus explained simply. "Even when the people who make it are flawed." Harrington nodded slowly, understanding more than Marcus had explicitly stated. A wise perspective for someone your age. As Harrington walked away, Marcus felt his mother's hand on his shoulder. "Ready for the next act?" she asked softly. Marcus straightened his back, noting the pain was still there but somehow less controlling than before. "Yes," he replied. "I think I am." The symphony hall blazed with light as the Johnson family arrived that evening. Marcus wore a charcoal suit that echoed Harrington's attire from the previous day, a subtle choice that hadn't escaped his mother's notice as she helped him adjust his tie. "Front row center," the usher confirmed, leading them to their seats. "Maestro Harrington's special guests." As they settled in, Marcus observed the pre-concert bustle. Musicians warming up on stage, audience members in evening wear exchanging pleasantries, program notes being studied. This world had been his mother's once, could have been his, perhaps, had circumstances been different. "Having second thoughts about music therapy?" Eliza asked quietly, reading his expression. Marcus shook his head. "No. I want to use music to heal, not just perform it." Dr. Johnson smiled approvingly. "The world needs both." The house lights dimmed, signaling the start of the concert. The orchestra tuned to the concertmaster's A, then fell silent as Victor Harrington strode onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. Harrington acknowledged the audience with a bow, then raised his baton. The program began with Beethoven's Leonore Overture No. 3, a piece about imprisonment and liberation that seemed oddly appropriate given the day's events. As the music unfurled, Marcus found himself analyzing Harrington's conducting style. The man was undeniably brilliant, drawing nuanced emotion from each orchestral section with precise gestures. Yet there was something almost mechanical in his perfection, as if technical mastery had become a substitute for genuine feeling. During intermission, an usher approached their seats. "Maestro Harrington requests your presence backstage, if convenient." They followed the usher through side doors and down a corridor to Harrington's private dressing room. He greeted them formally, still in his concert attire. "I'm pleased you could attend," he said, gesturing to a small seating area. "The second half features Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, a personal favorite." "It's a wonderful program," Eliza commented politely. An awkward silence followed, broken finally by Harrington clearing his throat. "I received a call from the board president before the concert. Mrs. Bennett has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation." Dr. Johnson nodded. "That's appropriate. Principal Whitmore has also been directed to implement a complete review of disciplinary practices, with special attention to potential patterns of bias. And the music program? Eliza asked. Ms. Reynolds has volunteered to work with an external consultant to evaluate selection processes for special opportunities. Harrington hesitated before adding, I've agreed to assist in that capacity, pro bono. Marcus raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised by this development. I have a professional interest in identifying overlooked talent, Harrington explained, meeting Marcus's gaze directly. Yesterday was instructive in that regard. The stage manager knocked briefly before entering. 5 minutes, maestro. Harrington nodded acknowledgement, then turned back to Marcus. There's something else. The symphony's educational outreach program includes a summer intensive for exceptional young musicians. I would like to recommend you for admission. Marcus blinked in surprise. Me? Your talent warrants professional development. The program includes a scholarship that covers all expenses. Before Marcus could respond, Harrington added quickly, this isn't charity or compensation. It's recognition of genuine ability. Marcus glanced at his parents, who maintained carefully neutral expressions, leaving the decision entirely to him. What would it involve? He asked cautiously. 6 weeks of intensive study. Master classes with principal players from major orchestras. Chamber music coaching. Solo performance opportunities. Harrington hesitated before adding, and access to physical therapists who specialize in musicians' injuries. The last edition revealed more thought than Marcus had expected, acknowledgement of his specific needs rather than a generic opportunity. Could I focus on music therapy applications? Marcus asked. Harrington appeared momentarily nonplussed by this question. The program is primarily performance-oriented, but adaptations could be considered. He was clearly uncomfortable with the idea of bending the traditional structure but making an effort nonetheless. I'll think about it, Marcus replied honestly. Another knock at the door. Maestro, places please. Harrington rose. I should return to the stage. He extended his hand to Marcus. Whatever you decide about the summer program, I hope you'll continue your musical development. Talent like yours shouldn't remain hidden. As they shook hands, Marcus recognized something in Harrington's expression, not quite friendship, but a nascent respect that hadn't been there before. Thank you for the opportunity, Marcus said simply. Harrington nodded, then with a formal bow to Eliza and Dr. Johnson, he was gone, back to the world where his authority was absolute and unquestioned. As they returned to their seats, Marcus's father asked quietly, will you accept his offer? Marcus considered the question carefully. I'm not sure yet. It's a prestigious opportunity, but you're wondering if it's being offered for the right reasons, his mother finished for him. Yes. And whether it's the right path for me. As the lights dimmed for the second half, Dr. Johnson placed a supportive hand on his son's shoulder. The beautiful thing about your life, Marcus, is that you get to choose your path now. Your talent gives you options, not obligations. As Harrington returned to the podium and lifted his baton for Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, Marcus realized that was the heart of the matter. For the first time, he had options that were truly his to evaluate, not limited by others' perceptions or his own fear. The opening clarinet solo began, dark and questioning. Whatever choice he made, Marcus knew one thing with certainty, he would never again make himself invisible. 1 month later, Marcus stood on the school auditorium stage again, this time as the featured soloist for the spring concert. The packed audience included his parents, of course, but also several unfamiliar faces from the local music community, drawn by word of the remarkable young violinist who had emerged seemingly from nowhere. In the front row sat Victor Harrington, who had arranged his schedule to attend despite having no professional obligation to do so. Beside him sat representatives from 3 prestigious music conservatories, including Juilliard and Curtis, his mother's alma mater. As Marcus tuned his violin, his mother's Kohler, which now felt like a true extension of himself, he reflected on the whirlwind of changes the past month had brought. Mrs. Bennet had resigned rather than face the full investigation, which had ultimately revealed a disturbing pattern of disproportionate physical discipline against students of color over her 20-year career. Principal Whitmore had been reprimanded and placed on probation, required to implement comprehensive anti-bias training for all staff. Ms. Reynolds had approached Marcus with a tearful apology for overlooking his talent, followed by an offer to feature him in the spring concert. She was working with an external consultant to restructure the music program's audition processes, ensuring opportunities were distributed based on ability rather than connections. Most surprisingly, Tyler Westbrook had sought Marcus out in the hallway one day, awkwardly extending an invitation to join the chamber music ensemble he had previously dominated. "We could use another strong violinist," he'd mumbled, unable to quite meet Marcus's eyes. It wasn't friendship, exactly, but it was an acknowledgement that had seemed impossible just weeks before. Marcus had ultimately decided to accept Harrington's summer intensive offer, but with conditions that the famous conductor had reluctantly agreed to: flexibility to explore music therapy applications, and permission to give free concerts at the hospital where his father worked. Tonight's program began with Marcus performing the Bach Chaconne, the piece that had changed everything. As he raised his bow, he caught his mother's eye in the audience. She nodded slightly, a gesture that conveyed everything: pride, love, and absolute confidence in his abilities. The first notes rang out clear and true. Marcus played without the burden of pain, both physical and emotional, that had constrained him before. The physical therapist recommended by Harrington had helped develop exercises that strengthened his back muscles, while the school had provided a special chair that accommodated his needs during long rehearsals. But the greater healing had come from finally being seen, truly seen, for who he was. The music flowed through him with newfound freedom, each phrase telling the story not just of Bach's grief but of Marcus's journey from shadow to light. When the final notes faded, the audience rose as one in thunderous applause. Marcus bowed, accepting their appreciation not with embarrassment but with the quiet dignity his father had always embodied. After the concert, as audience members gathered in the lobby for refreshments, Marcus found himself momentarily alone with Harrington. "Remarkable progress in just a month," Harrington commented, his tone professional but tinged with genuine admiration. "Thank you, sir." The Juilliard representative was quite impressed. She mentioned potential for early admission to their pre-college program. Marcus nodded. "I've received several offers. I'm considering them alongside local programs in music therapy." "You're still fixed on that path?" Harrington couldn't quite keep the puzzlement from his voice. "Not fixed," Marcus corrected gently. "Choosing. There's a difference." Harrington accepted this distinction with a thoughtful nod. "Your mother made similar choices. I never understood her decision to step back from performing until recently." "What changed your understanding?" Harrington considered the question carefully. "I've spent my career believing talent should be displayed on the largest possible stage. But perhaps true artistry lies in choosing how and where to share your gifts." He extended his hand. "Whatever path you choose, Mr. Johnson, I expect you'll transform it, just as you've transformed this school." As they shook hands, Marcus realized the transformation extended to Harrington himself. The arrogance remained, certainly, but it was tempered now by a humility that hadn't existed before. Across the lobby, Marcus spotted Mrs. Bennett's former students gathered around his parents, sharing stories that had previously gone untold. Each account contributed to a fuller understanding of the systemic issues that had allowed a teacher to abuse her authority for decades without consequence. Nearby, Ms. Reynolds discussed program reforms with the district arts coordinator, gesturing animatedly about new audition procedures designed to discover hidden talent regardless of background. Even Tyler stood with his parents, listening attentively as the Curtis representative explained their diversity initiatives, programs that Tyler's father had impulsively agreed to fund after hearing Marcus play at the board meeting. Small changes, perhaps, in the grand scheme. But meaningful ones. As Marcus rejoined his parents, his father embraced him proudly. "How does it feel?" he asked simply. Marcus considered the question, violin still in hand. "Different," he replied honestly. "But right." His mother smiled, understanding completely. "That's how transformation feels. As they prepared to leave, Marcus noticed a group of younger students watching him with undisguised admiration, including several who shared his skin color, who perhaps saw in him possibilities they hadn't imagined for themselves before. He nodded to them in acknowledgement, accepting his role not just as a musician but as a visible example of what had previously remained hidden. Talent transcends expectations, and music belongs to everyone willing to embrace its challenges and joys. Outside in the spring evening, stars visible above the school that had been both his challenge and his stage, Marcus realized the greatest transformation wasn't in the institution or the people around him. It was in himself, in the courage to be seen, to be heard, and to choose his own path forward. No matter where that path led, he would walk it standing tall, violin in hand, his music a bridge between worlds that had seemed unbridgeable separated just 1 month before. This, he thought as they drove home, was the true cadence of change, notes that resonated long after the performance ended, transforming both performer and audience in ways neither could have anticipated when the first chord was struck. Dear friend, music belongs to everyone. Talent doesn't discriminate based on race, background, or circumstance, but sadly, our systems often do. This story reminds us that brilliance can be hiding in plain sight, overlooked simply because we refuse to see beyond our preconceptions. When we silence voices or dismiss potential based on appearance, we all lose something precious. Let's create a world where every Marcus gets the chance to play their music without fear or apology. If this message resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can amplify stories that need to be heard and create the change we wish to see.